The briefcase hit the mahogany desk with a force that sent papers sliding to the floor. $10 million in crisp $100 bills spilled across the polished surface, some bills fluttering to the ground like autumn leaves. The woman standing across from Jae-hyun Park didn't even glance at the money. Her arms remained crossed, her expression carved from stone. $10 million, Jae-hyun said, his Korean accent clipping each word with precision. Untraceable. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering Seoul skyline. The city spread out like conquered territory. Take it. Walk away. Forget everything you saw tonight. Before we continue, can I ask you something real quick? I'm trying to figure out where people who love good stories are watching from these days. Are you team phone in bed, team laptop at work, or team living room TV? Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching this from, because I'm curious if anyone's actually using those tablet things anymore, and I also want to know where in the world I should send my Valentine's gifts. Rebecca Johnson's dark eyes never left his face. She leaned forward, palms flat on his desk, bringing herself eye level with the man who controlled half the underground operations in 3 countries. The movement was deliberate, calculated. No. The single word hung in the air like a gunshot. 2 bodyguards shifted by the door, their suits rustling. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his angular cheekbone. You don't understand what you're refusing. I understand perfectly. Rebecca straightened, her 6-foot frame commanding the space despite being outnumbered. Her natural hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not a strand out of place. She wore a black blazer over a white shirt, professional armor for a battlefield that dealt in power rather than bullets. Jae-hyun stood slowly, his movements controlled, predatory. At 43, he had built an empire on knowing exactly what everyone wanted and exactly what they would do to get it. This woman was an anomaly, a variable that didn't fit his equations. Everyone has a price, Ms. Johnson. I've simply not found yours yet. Then you'll be searching forever. She turned toward the door. Wait. The word cracked like a whip. The bodyguards moved, blocking her path. Jae-hyun circled his desk, hands clasped behind his back. Do you know what happens to people who refuse me? Do you understand the consequences of walking out of this room with what you know? Rebecca stopped but didn't turn. I'm not afraid of consequences. You should be. He was close now, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, close enough to feel the heat of his presence. You witnessed a transaction tonight that could destroy 3 governments and collapse financial markets across Asia. You think 10 million is generous? I'm being merciful. I could offer you nothing but a shallow grave. She turned then, meeting his gaze with an intensity that made him pause. Is that supposed to frighten me? Threats? I've been threatened by men more powerful than you, and I'm still standing. Something flickered in Jae-hyun's eyes, curiosity, respect, and something darker. Then what will move you? What do you want? Justice. The word fell between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Jae-hyun laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. Justice? In this world? You're more naive than I thought. He gestured to the money scattered across his desk. This is the only justice that matters. Power. Control. The ability to shape reality to your will. That's not justice. That's tyranny dressed in expensive suits. He stepped closer, invading her space, testing her resolve. And what would you know about my world? You're an analyst, a consultant brought in to examine my legitimate business operations. You stumbled onto something you shouldn't have seen, and now you're playing a game you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Rebecca's voice remained level, controlled. I understand that you move weapons through pharmaceutical shipments. I understand that you use your tech companies to launder money for cartels in 3 continents. I understand that the transaction I witnessed tonight involved selling military-grade surveillance software to a regime that will use it to hunt down journalists and activists. The air in the room changed. The bodyguards' hands moved subtly toward their jackets. Jae-hyun's expression hardened into something cold and ancient. You know too much. Yes. And that's why your money means nothing. She took a step forward, closing the distance he'd created. Because if I take it, every person who will suffer because of what you're doing, their blood is on my hands. Every journalist silenced, every activist disappeared, every family torn apart by the weapons you traffic, I become complicit. I become you. Jae-hyun stared at her, genuinely confused for perhaps the first time in years. So you'd rather die than compromise your principles? That's not bravery. That's stupidity. Maybe. But at least I'll die as myself, not as someone's purchased silence. She glanced at the money, then back at him. You think power is control. But real power is being able to walk away from everything you're offering because you know who you are. For a long moment, neither moved. The city lights beyond the windows painted shifting shadows across the room. One of the bodyguards cleared his throat, a question in the gesture. Jae-hyun raised a hand, stopping whatever violence had been about to unfold. You interest me, Ms. Johnson, he said finally, returning to his desk. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching the light. Most people who refuse my offers do so because they want more. They're negotiating. But you actually believe what you're saying. Belief is all we have when everything else is stripped away. He took a sip, savoring it. Tell me something. When did you decide you were willing to die for your principles? What happened to make you this way? Rebecca's expression shifted, a hairline crack in her armor. That's not your business. So there is a story. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Everyone has a story, Ms. Johnson. Everyone has a moment that defined them. I'm curious about yours. My story doesn't change what I witnessed tonight. It doesn't change what you are. No. But it might explain why you're choosing martyrdom over survival. He set down his glass. Let me offer you something else, then. Not money. Information. She narrowed her eyes. What information? About who really killed your brother. The world tilted. Rebecca felt the floor shift beneath her feet, felt her carefully constructed composure crack and splinter. How do you know about Victor? Jae-hyun's smile widened. I know everything about you, Rebecca Johnson. Born in Chicago, raised by a single mother after your father died in a factory accident. Graduated top of your class from MIT. Recruited by 3 different intelligence agencies before you chose the private sector. And 5 years ago, your younger brother Victor was killed in what the police called a random mugging gone wrong. Except it wasn't random, was it? Her hands clenched into fists. You don't know anything about Victor. I know he was an investigative journalist. I know he was working on a story about corruption in Chicago's municipal contracts. I know he was close to exposing a network that connected city officials, construction companies, and a very particular crime family. And I know exactly who ordered his death. Rebecca's vision blurred. 5 years of grief, 5 years of unanswered questions, 5 years of knowing the official story was a lie but having no proof, no justice, no closure. You're lying. Am I? He pulled a folder from his desk drawer, slid it across the surface toward her. Names, dates, wire transfers, communications. Everything your brother found and more. Everything you'd need to bring down the people responsible. She stared at the folder like it was a venomous snake. And what do you want in exchange? Your silence about tonight. Walk away from what you witnessed. Take the information about your brother, get your justice, and leave my operations alone. It was a perfect trap, baited with the one thing she'd been searching for since the night she got the call that Victor was dead. Justice for her brother in exchange for letting Jae-hyun continue his operations. One life's worth of accountability traded for countless others who would suffer. No. The word came out quieter this time, but no less firm. Jae-hyun's expression shifted from confidence to genuine surprise. You'd give up justice for your brother? After 5 years of searching? Victor taught me something before he died. Rebecca's voice cracked but held. He taught me that real journalism, real justice, isn't about one story or one person. It's about the principle that truth matters more than safety. He died for that principle. If I take your deal, I make his death meaningless. So you'll sacrifice his memory for strangers you'll never meet? I'm honoring his memory. He'd never want me to compromise everything he believed in just to avenge him. That's not justice. That's revenge. And revenge doesn't stop the next victor from dying. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken violence and impossible choices. Jae-hyun studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a language he couldn't speak. Finally, he gestured to one of his bodyguards. "Bring him in." The door opened. A man in his 60s was escorted in, hands zip-tied, face bruised, terror in his eyes. Rebecca recognized him from the files she'd been reviewing, one of Jae-hyun's legitimate business partners, a tech CEO who provided cover for the illegal operations. "This is Daniel Chin," Jae-hyun said conversationally. "He's been stealing from me. Small amounts, he thought I wouldn't notice. But I notice everything." He pulled a pistol from his desk drawer, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency. "I'm going to kill him now. Unless you agree to take the money and walk away." Daniel Chen's eyes went wide. "Please, I have children, I have grandchildren, please." "Shut up." Jae-hyun didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on Rebecca. "Well, Ms. Johnson? Your principles versus his life. Make your choice." Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the test, the real price of her refusal. "You're going to kill him anyway. Whether I take your money or not, you've already decided his fate." "Perhaps. But if you take the deal, you won't have to watch. You won't have to carry the weight of knowing you could have saved him. You're trying to break me. Make me complicit in your violence by forcing me to choose. I'm showing you the reality of your choices. Every principle has a cost. I want you to see exactly what that cost is." He raised the gun, pointing it at Daniel Chen's head. "Wait." Rebecca's voice cut through the tension. "If you kill him, you prove that you're exactly what I said you are. A tyrant who uses fear and violence to control people. You prove that everything I witnessed tonight needs to be exposed. And what does that matter if you're dead beside him? It matters because I'm not the only one who knows. You think I came here without insurance? Without documentation? Without making sure that if something happens to me, everything I discovered goes public?" It was a bluff, but she sold it with every ounce of conviction she possessed. Jae-hyun's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed. He lowered the gun slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're lying." "Am I?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Are you willing to bet your entire empire on that assumption?" The standoff stretched. Daniel Chen whimpered, tears streaming down his face. The bodyguards waited for orders. The city beyond the windows continued its oblivious dance of lights and movement, unaware of the chess game being played 40 stories above the streets. "Get him out of here," Jae-hyun finally said, gesturing to Chen. "But watch him. If he talks, kill his family first, then him." The bodyguards dragged Chen away. His relief was palpable, desperate. The door closed behind them, leaving Rebecca alone with Jae-hyun once more. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish," Jae-hyun said, setting the gun back in his drawer. "I haven't decided which. I'm neither. I'm just someone who knows that compromising once means compromising forever. Take your money today, tomorrow you take something else, next week something worse. Eventually, you don't recognize yourself anymore." He poured another whiskey, drank it in one swallow. "You know what your problem is, Ms. Johnson? You think the world is divided into good people and bad people. But it's not that simple. Everyone is compromised. Everyone has their price. The only difference is how much we pretend otherwise. Maybe you're right. Maybe everyone does have a price. But that doesn't mean I have to accept it. Just because the world is broken doesn't mean I have to help break it further." Noble words. Let's see how long they last when the consequences catch up to you. He moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. "I could have you killed tonight. Make it look like an accident. Mugging gone wrong, just like your brother. You could. But you won't." "Oh, and why is that?" "Because you're curious. You've spent your whole life buying and controlling people, and now you've met someone you can't buy, can't control, can't predict. That fascinates you more than my death would satisfy you." Jae-hyun turned, and for the first time that night, he looked genuinely amused. Perceptive. Very perceptive. He walked back to his desk, began gathering the scattered money, placing it back in the briefcase with methodical precision. You're right. I'm curious. So I'm going to make you a different offer. I'm not interested in any offers. This one you'll want to hear. Work for me. She laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You have skills I need. More importantly, you have integrity I can't buy. That makes you valuable in ways money never could. Work for me, use your position to reform my operations from the inside. Turn them legitimate. Clean up the mess. Why would you want that? Because I'm getting old, Ms. Johnson. And old men think about legacy. What I've built is powerful, but it's also fragile. Built on violence and fear and compromised people who will turn on me the moment I show weakness. But if someone like you, someone who can't be bought, started making my empire legitimate, that would be real power. Sustainable power. Rebecca studied him, searching for the trap. And what about the transaction I witnessed tonight? The surveillance software going to a regime that will use it to kill people? Already in motion. Can't be stopped. But future transactions? Those you could influence. Redirect. Transform. He closed the briefcase with a decisive snap. I'm not offering you money, Ms. Johnson. I'm offering you actual power to make a difference. Isn't that what you want? Real change instead of martyrdom. It was tempting, seductively so. The chance to dismantle his empire from within, to redirect resources toward legitimate ends, to actually save the people she'd been trying to protect by refusing his money. But she'd seen this game before, seen how good intentions got twisted into rationalizations for increasingly dark compromises. No, she said for the third time that night. Because the moment I accept that position, I become complicit in everything that happens while I'm reforming your empire. Every weapon sold, every life destroyed while I'm working from the inside, that's on me. You're offering me the illusion of power while keeping all the real control. So what will you do? Go to the authorities? They're already compromised. Go to the press? I own half of them and can discredit the other half. Go public on your own? You'll be dead or discredited before your story gains traction. He leaned forward, intensity burning in his dark eyes. You can't win this, Rebecca. You can only choose how you lose. Maybe, but I can lose on my own terms. I can lose knowing I didn't become what I was fighting against. And that's enough for you? A moral victory while nothing actually changes. Something will change. Me refusing you tonight changed something. Daniel Chen living changed something. Every small act of resistance changes something, even if we never see the full results. She moved toward the door. My brother taught me that. He knew he might not live to see the corruption he exposed brought down, but he exposed it anyway because it was the right thing to do. That's the only legacy that matters. Jae-hyun watched her, something unreadable in his expression. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? The point, he said quietly, is survival. Power. Control. Everything else is just stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Then we tell ourselves different stories. She reached for the door handle. I'm leaving now. You can have me killed, but you won't. Not tonight. Because you're still curious about what happens next. About whether someone like me can actually exist in your world without being corrupted by it. And if you're wrong? If I decide curiosity isn't worth the risk? Then you'll have proven my point. That your world can't tolerate anyone who refuses to play by its rules. That every empire built on violence eventually consumes everything, even curiosity. She pulled the door open. Goodbye, Mr. Park. Rebecca. His voice stopped her one last time. She looked back. You asked earlier what happened to make me this way. Want to know the truth? She waited. I used to be like you. Believed in justice, in doing the right thing. Then I watched good people die while corrupt people prospered. I watched the system protect the powerful and crush the righteous. So I decided if the world was going to be ruled by monsters, I'd become the most powerful monster of all. At least then I could control some of the damage. That's the saddest thing I've heard all night, Rebecca said softly. You became everything you hated and convinced yourself it was pragmatic. And you're going to get yourself killed holding on to principles the world abandoned a long time ago. Maybe, but at least I'll die as myself. She stepped into the hallway. If you change your mind about wanting to be something more than a monster, you know where to find me. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Jae-hyun stood alone in his office, surrounded by the wealth and power he'd accumulated over decades of ruthless calculation. The briefcase of money sat on his desk, untouched. Through the windows, Seoul glittered like a constellation of captured stars. He picked up his phone, speed-dialed a number. "Let her go," he said when someone answered. "No tail. No surveillance. Just let her walk." "Boss, are you sure?" "She knows." "I know what she knows. Let her go anyway." He ended the call, poured himself another whiskey. For the first time in 20 years, Jae-hyun Park felt something he'd almost forgotten: doubt. Outside, Rebecca walked through the building's marble lobby, past security guards who watched but didn't move, through glass doors into the cool Seoul night. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up to her. She'd gambled everything on a bluff, and somehow, impossibly, she'd survived. But survival wasn't victory. The transaction she'd witnessed would still proceed. People would still die. The empire would continue operating. Nothing had actually changed except that she'd maintained her integrity and somehow kept breathing. Was that enough? She thought of Victor, of the last conversation they'd had before he died. He'd been excited about his investigation, knowing it was dangerous but believing it was necessary. "Someone has to stand up," he'd said. "Even if we fail, even if it costs us everything, someone has to try. Otherwise, we're just accepting that evil wins by default." She pulled out her phone, opened a secure messaging app, began typing. There were people she trusted, journalists who couldn't be bought, activists who'd dedicated their lives to exposing corruption. Maybe she couldn't stop the transaction tonight, but she could document it. She could add it to the growing pile of evidence against Jae-hyun Park and people like him. She could keep fighting in the ways available to her. The message sent. More would follow. Detailed reports, documentation, everything she discovered during her weeks examining Park's operations. It might not be enough to bring him down, not immediately, but it would add weight to the scale. And maybe, eventually, that weight would tip toward justice. She hailed a taxi, gave the driver the address of her hotel. As the car pulled away from Park's building, she looked back one last time. 40 stories up, a light was still on in his office. She wondered if he was standing at the window watching her leave, still curious about the woman who'd refused him. In his office, Jae-hyun was indeed at the window. He watched the taxi disappear into Seoul's midnight traffic, then turned back to his desk. The folder containing information about Victor Johnson's murder sat where he'd left it. He picked it up, considered it, then fed it into his office shredder. "Interesting," he murmured to the empty room. He'd fully expected her to take that deal, had been certain that personal justice would override her principles. The fact that she'd refused even that suggested something he hadn't encountered in years, genuine conviction. It troubled him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Not because it threatened his empire, not because it represented danger, but because it reminded him of the person he'd once been, before compromise had become strategy and strategy had become identity. He made another call. "The surveillance software transaction. Delay it." "Boss? We're already committed. The buyers are expecting." "I said delay it. Tell them technical issues. Refund their deposit. I need time to think." "Time to think about what?" "Whether being a monster is actually sustainable or just convenient." He ended the call before questions could follow. Rebecca didn't sleep that night. She sat in her hotel room, writing detailed accounts of everything she'd witnessed, everything she knew. By dawn, she had 30 pages of documentation sent to 7 different recipients across 4 continents. Insurance, but also testimony. Evidence that would survive even if she didn't. When the sun rose over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, she finally allowed herself to breathe. She'd survived the night. She'd maintained her integrity. The fight wasn't over, would probably never be over, but she was still standing. Still herself. Still willing to pay the cost of being someone who refused to be bought. 3 days later, news broke that a major surveillance software deal with a controversial regime had been cancelled due to technical difficulties. The tech community speculated about corporate pressure, about human rights concerns, about market forces. No one knew that the real reason was a conversation in a high-rise office, a woman who'd refused $10 million, and a man who'd been reminded of what it felt like to have principles worth dying for. Rebecca read the news from the airport, waiting for her flight back to Chicago. One transaction stopped. One small victory in an endless war. Was it enough to justify the risks she'd taken, the danger she'd put herself in? She thought of Victor again, of his belief that small acts of resistance mattered even when they seemed futile. Her phone buzzed. A known number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her take the call. Ms. Johnson. Jae-hyun's voice, calm and controlled. I thought you should know. The information about your brother's death. I've arranged for it to reach the FBI anonymously. No strings attached. She was silent, processing. Why? Because you were right. About compromise, about becoming what we fight against. I'm not ready to change everything about who I am. But maybe I can change some things. Small acts of resistance, isn't that what you called them? This doesn't make us allies. No. But maybe it makes us both something better than we were 3 days ago. He paused. Good luck, Rebecca Johnson. I hope your principles protect you better than my power protects me. The call ended. Rebecca stared at her phone, then out at the Seoul skyline one last time. Something had changed that night in Park's office. Not everything. Not enough. But something. And sometimes, in a world built on compromise and corruption, something was all you could hope for. The real victory wasn't in winning completely. It was in refusing to lose yourself in the process. It was in standing firm when everything and everyone told you to bend. It was in believing that principles mattered even when they came at terrible cost. As her flight was called, Rebecca gathered her things and walked toward the gate. Behind her, a city full of secrets continued its complicated dance between power and principle, corruption and redemption. She was just one person, had just one story, had made just one choice to refuse the money. But maybe one choice was enough. Maybe one person refusing to be bought was enough to plant a seed of doubt in a monster's mind. Maybe one act of integrity was enough to shift the balance, however slightly, toward justice. She boarded the plane, settled into her seat, and closed her eyes. The fight would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. But tonight, she could rest knowing she'd stayed true to herself. She'd faced down power with nothing but conviction and somehow emerged intact. And in a world that constantly pushed people to compromise, to surrender, to accept that this was just how things were, that mattered more than she could possibly know. 2 months later, Rebecca stood in a Chicago courtroom watching federal prosecutors present the case against the crime family responsible for Victor's death. The evidence was overwhelming, detailed, damning. Documents that could only have come from someone deep inside the network, someone with access to the kind of information that took years to compile. She knew where it had come from, knew what it represented. A monster trying to become something else. A man who'd built an empire on violence trying to dismantle pieces of it, one careful step at a time. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply change, slow and painful and uncertain, but change nonetheless. The jury came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Life sentences without parole. Justice, finally, for Victor and for all the other victims whose names would never make headlines. Rebecca felt her mother's hand squeeze hers, felt tears she'd been holding back for 5 years finally break free. That night, her phone rang again. A known number. She knew who it was before she answered. I heard about the verdict, Jae-hyun said. I'm sorry about your brother. For what it's worth, the evidence I sent, it was complete. No redactions. No protection for anyone who deserved to fall. Why are you calling me? Because I wanted you to know that I've been making other changes. Small ones. Shutting down operations that primarily hurt innocent people. Refusing deals that would fund regimes like the one we discussed. It's costing me both financially and in terms of influence, but I find I care less about that than I expected. You want me to thank you? To absolve you? No. I want you to know that your refusal that night, it did something. Changed something. Not everything. Not nearly enough. But something. You asked me once if being a monster was sustainable or just convenient. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I'm trying. That's more than I've done in 20 years. Rebecca looked out her apartment window at the Chicago skyline, so different from Seoul's but just as full of hidden stories, hidden struggles between power and principle. Change isn't a destination, Mr. Park. It's a choice you make every day. Every hour. Every moment someone offers you the convenient option instead of the right one. I'm learning that. Slowly. Painfully. But I'm learning. He paused. If you ever need resources for your work, for exposing corruption or helping victims, reach out. Anonymously if you prefer. No strings. No expectations. Just someone trying to use power for something other than self-preservation. I'll think about it, she said, which was more than she'd thought she'd ever say to him again. That's all I can ask. The line went quiet for a moment. Your brother would be proud of you, Ms. Johnson. Standing firm when everyone told you to bend. That takes more courage than most people will ever understand. He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite being terrified of the consequences. A good lesson. One I'm still learning. He ended the call without saying goodbye, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts and her memories and the hard-won justice that had taken 5 years to achieve. She thought about that night in Seoul, about standing in an office 40 stories above the city, refusing $10 million and everything it represented. She thought about the fear she'd felt, the certainty that she wouldn't survive the night, the desperate bluff that had somehow worked. She thought about all the ways it could have gone wrong, all the reasons everyone would have told her to take the money and stay silent. But she'd refused. And that refusal had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted. A surveillance deal cancelled. Evidence delivered to federal prosecutors. A man who'd built an empire on violence beginning, however slowly, to dismantle it. Small victories, perhaps, in an endless war against corruption and compromise. But victories nonetheless. The world didn't change overnight. Injustice still flourished. Powerful people still used their power to crush the vulnerable. Corruption still infected systems from the lowest levels to the highest. But individual choices still mattered. Individual acts of resistance still made a difference. Individual people refusing to be bought still planted seeds that could grow into something larger. Rebecca returned to her work the next day, consulting for companies, looking for the corruption hidden beneath legitimate operations, exposing what needed to be exposed. It was dangerous work, frustrating work, work that often felt futile in the face of systems designed to protect the powerful. But it was her work, her choice, her way of honoring Victor's memory and the principles he'd died defending. And every time someone offered her money to look the other way, to compromise just this once, to accept that this was just how the world worked, she thought of that night in Seoul. She thought of the briefcase full of cash, the threats, the manipulation, the desperate attempts to find her price. She thought of how close she'd come to breaking and how she'd somehow held firm. And she said no. Every time. Without hesitation. Because that's what integrity meant. Not being perfect. Not never being afraid. Not having all the answers. Just refusing to surrender your principles when it would be easier, safer, more profitable to let them go. Just standing firm when everything and everyone told you to bend. Just being willing to pay the price of staying true to yourself. In Seoul, Jae-hyun Park sat in his office, looking out at the same skyline he'd shown Rebecca months before. His empire was smaller now, less profitable, less powerful. But somehow, for the first time in decades, he slept without nightmares. The weight of all the compromises he'd made, all the people he'd hurt, all the lines he'd crossed, they hadn't disappeared. They never would. But they felt less crushing than they had before. He couldn't undo the past. Couldn't bring back the victims of his violence and greed. Couldn't erase the years of being exactly the monster Rebecca had named him. But he could choose differently going forward. Could make the hard calls that cost him power but preserved something more valuable. Could try, however imperfectly, to become something other than what he'd been. It wasn't redemption. Redemption required far more than a few months of slightly better choices. But it was change. And change, he'd learned from a woman who'd refused his money, was something you chose every day, every hour, every moment someone offered you the convenient option instead of the right one. The story of what happened in that office never became public. No dramatic exposé, no headline-grabbing revelation. Just two people who'd faced each other across an impossible divide and both walked away changed. Just a woman who'd refused to compromise and a man who'd been reminded that alternatives to monstrosity existed. Sometimes the biggest victories aren't the ones that make the news. Sometimes they're the quiet moments of refusal, the private acts of integrity, the invisible choices to stand firm when bending would be so much easier. Sometimes they're the seeds planted in darkness that may never bloom into anything visible but change the soil nonetheless. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own principles and the costs you're willing to pay to maintain them, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in Rebecca's position? When has refusing to compromise mattered most in your life? And if you want to see more stories about people who choose integrity over convenience, who stand firm when everything tells them to bend, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These stories matter, and the more we share them, the more we remind ourselves and each other that principles are worth fighting for. Like this video if you believe that some things can't and shouldn't be bought, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that standing alone doesn't mean standing weak. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.